Chapter 3 Virginity. As the autumn sky began to kiss the winter with the chill of water droplets suspended in the air, the searching in me intensified and became a deeper kind of longing. The chasm between myself and my parents was established, and a feeling of isolation flooded into my soul. I was searching for love and belonging, and a sense of home in a place that I did not understand. I felt that I could find all of this in a person who was the one for me. This was a promise between me and God. I began to write my poetry, prose, and song lyrics again as a form of self-expression and catharsis, a way to make sense of my universe and myself. It allowed me to articulate the landscape of my soul and the incomprehensible worlds therein, becoming like a religious rite that resulted in something sacred, a bond between myself and God, who I referred to as Jesus, and later as Yeshua. He and I made a deal, one that I did not deviate from at any time. I wore a large silver cross around my neck on a black cord, but would rarely discuss why or what it represented to me. It was around this time that I found myself at the Bundesbank Park in the guise of a girl, sitting on the grass, pondering the complexities of life again. There, with friends on the hill under the falling leaves, I watched the water fountain in the pond below shoot straight up into the air and felt the spray carried on the wind as it reached my face. It was a day like so many others, before and after, relishing the last rays of the sun as it began to set, listening to music on the boombox, compliments of Patrick. At the moment of silence between songs, I felt the slight anticipation of what might come next. Would it be the same band or something different? It was something decidedly different. As I heard the echoing melodic rock guitar riff filling the chill of the autumn air, something in me shifted, and I listened with more awareness. It was one of those defining moments in life when you feel that something true is happening, even if you don't know yet what that is. It was resonance. Then the lead vocal slid in like beaded silk along the rhythm to the beat from a male with a voice so smooth and sweet that it was like swallowing pure honey. That was the moment that the longing in the music met the longing in me, and I began to really connect with the song. I listened to the words flow as the melody cascaded note by note into flawless harmonies that spoke to my soul. We shared something real, this band and me. I understood something intuitively about them and casually asked who they were. Patrick replied, Voyage, using the French pronunciation. Perfect, I thought. What an amazing name for a band. It carried a sense of purpose and unfoldment. This began my love affair with Voyage that would carry on for quite some time, though I did not immediately run out and buy all of their albums. Instead, I tucked it away like a secret, knowing that the next album that I bought would be theirs, and would be the one with this song, Skyward. It was a mystical representation of a core-level dilemma, being somewhere, feeling cold and alone, lost in the world, and longing for home. It was during the late autumn that Joshua and Gavin invited me to tag along with them to meet one of their older friends, a guy named Destin that lived up in the maids' quarters in Highcog. Highcog was the main housing area for people that worked for the State Department in Frankfurt, and it became one of my many stomping grounds. The buildings were austere and had the design of German efficiency, painted in a dull, bleak, pale beige-brown color that someone must have thought suited them. Each building was several stories high and included a functional attic space complete with a sloped roof and dormer-style windows. Sitting atop the 4th floor, the attic level lifted the structural space to 5 stories, giving it quite the view. Floating above the mundane life below was a long, dimly lit hall with an air of being haunted that contained smaller rooms away from the condo-like quality of the lower floors. These rooms were the maids' quarters, literally where the housekeepers had lived in single rooms with a water closet at their disposal down the hall. Usually, a trip through the long hall to the WC left you feeling that you had experienced an encounter with the ghostly realm, or at least gone through a hidden doorway in time to the not-so-long-forgotten past. This community of buildings had previously been used as housing for the Nazi officers during World War II, but were commandeered and converted for the diplomats, spies, clerical workers, and their families living abroad and working at the American Consulate General in Frankfurt. So it was, on some nameless, dreary, overcast Frankfurt weekday, that I followed Joshua and Gavin up the 4 flights of stairs to the 5th level portal into a new world, the world of destined Britain. As we knocked on the door, Joshua told me to just be cool, while Gavin told me that his older brother lived in the room next door to Destin's. When the door opened, we were beckoned in by Destin, who upon seeing me raised his right eyebrow in query to the others. He was about my height, with shoulder-length, light blonde hair, and large, intense blue-green eyes. His eyes reminded me of some otherworldly, ethereal creature watching me intently as I was introduced, and we all sat down in a circle to greet and smoke. I noticed as I looked around that there were gorgeous pencil drawings of a beautiful woman hanging all over his room, while a guitar sat upright, like a lover, in the corner beside the bed underneath the dormer. During my future visits, I would go to the window often to get a higher perspective and look out over Highcog and that part of the city, dreaming of better days. When you are under Destin's gaze, he summed you up quickly. For his own reasons, he had no time to misunderstand people or their motives. I must have stood up under all of this scrutiny because I was allowed to stay and was invited back. There were some mild and yet unreproachable instructions for my visits that were to come later. His room became an oasis for me, away from the vagaries of home, the mind-numbing torture of school, and the post-World War II Cold War feeling of Frankfurt itself. The second time that I showed up there, I went alone after school. I felt drawn to him and his room, almost as though I had been called. I knocked on the door and heard him say in a loud, no-nonsense tone, "Who is it?" from the other side. I identified myself and was invited in to find him sitting on the floor and playing his guitar. He didn't speak to me or even look up to acknowledge me, so I felt uncomfortable, as though maybe I had made a mistake in going there. I began to look more closely at his artwork, all gorgeous women, with a few sketches of one in particular that I found to be exceptionally beautiful. The verbal silence, along with his continued playing on the guitar, was something that I had never encountered before. In an effort to ease the perceived tension, I proceeded to talk about my admiration of his art hanging on the walls. After what seemed like a good 20 minutes of awkward nonverbal communication, my presence was acknowledged, and with a wave of his arm, he welcomed me to sit down on the floor. He told me with extreme, vehement clarity that when I entered anyone's space, particularly his space, that it was expected that I harmonize with my surroundings. Furthermore, it was not necessary to interrupt or disrupt what he was doing by talking incessantly just to fill a void. Okay, fair enough, I thought, a little self-consciously. I apologized and told him that I was just trying to be friendly and that I wasn't used to entering the domain of an artist, not even stopping to consider the fact that I was one myself. He softened, explaining his process to me, and said that he wasn't like most people, something that I had already gathered by his bearing and demeanor. Yeah, I thought silently as it washed over my face. It was then that we began to have a real conversation, one with substance and meaning. I asked about the pencil drawing hanging next to his desk of the beautiful woman. Is that a girlfriend? No, he said. That's Kate Bush. Who's Kate Bush? I asked somewhat timidly, not wanting to step on any hidden emotional minds. That was when, instead of telling me, he showed me her ethereal photo from the album Lionheart and played it for me. I felt enraptured by it. He explained that the best way to listen to it was to lie down in the dark with no distractions and lose yourself in the music. Ah, my soul felt a kindred spirit in him, and we became friends. An instant emotional connectivity arose between us, with a wellspring of common understanding. I was able to relax, breathe, and be myself with him more than I had ever done before in my brief yet remarkable existence. We began to get close physically not long after our first meeting, and there was a shared intimacy in that arena as well. We engaged in one of my most favorite activities, kissing, often. I knew that I had to tell him early on that I was a virgin and had no intention of changing my status. He let me know that he really wanted to have a conversation about my virginity, and I agreed. I confidently told him that if he felt that he needed more than what I could give him, I would happily disappear from his life so he could find someone to fulfill his desires. At that point, he dropped a bombshell and told me that he, too, was a virgin. For some reason, I thought surely at 21 that he had been with someone. I was surprised that he hadn't, and beyond that, he informed me that I was his first real girlfriend. Yes, I earned girlfriend status early, myself only 15 years old, with this 21-year-old enigmatic boy. I admit that I felt a bit amazed, because I was led to believe that most boys just wanted to have sex, but it seemed that I had found the exception. He explained that for him, it just had never been the right time. He was forthright about feeling like he didn't fit in with the usual social mores of that time and place, much like a fish out of water. In many ways, he was like a man from outer space, with a deep reverence for the female form and femininity. I suppose that because he had just such a profound relationship with his own soul, that he was able to understand mine to some degree. Though it was not only that, he was able to understand me, and for me to feel understood was like an elixir, a magic potion that drew me in deeper to connection with him. What felt so right was being able to be real with another person, involving little to no pretense. I remember the day that Joshua and Gavin came by and found me there with Destin, and it became obvious to them that we were together. Joshua's eyes widened and his eyebrows raised in very genuine surprise. He said with his deep, husky voice, "Well, so what's new around here?" It was fascinating to me because Joshua and I had a compelling attraction that we hadn't really acknowledged, and we were friends. In stark contrast to this, Destin and I were friends and didn't have that kind of sexual chemistry and crazy attraction, but we understood each other innately and differently. What surprised me even more was that as a result of being Destin's girlfriend, I somehow earned higher status within my peer group. They considered him the epitome of cool, and therefore looked at me with new eyes as a result of my connection with him. They re-evaluated who I was. Destin explained to them that we needed our relationship to be on the down low because of the considerable age difference. Interestingly, I perceived that it was also important to convey my virginal status to my friends at this point, to clear up any discrepancies in their thinking regarding me or what I was about. Of course, I wasn't as detailed about it as I had been with Destin. I told him the reason that I was a virgin was because I felt like I was waiting for someone really special who would love me, someone with whom I could stay for a while, if not my whole life. I didn't know at that point how long it would last. I only knew that I would be loved and that this person who loved me would be the one. With my male peers, it was more like a public service announcement. I'm a virgin because that is my choice and it's not going to change. It's who I am. That pretty much dashed anyone else's ideas regarding the nature of my relationship with Destin. Being known as a virgin became a double-edged sword for me. It certainly cleared up any boundary issues with the people that I knew who cared about my welfare. Gray areas became extremely black and white, with no room for negotiation. Unbeknownst to me, it also made me more appealing and alluring, while engendering a greater respect. The downside to this was that I became known as the Virgin, and it spread like a swarm of honeybees in a clover meadow. Everyone knew. I was proud of it, but I didn't feel the need to update people on my sexual status every time I had an intimate encounter with someone. I noticed Joshua's process of perception at my change of status from Destin's friend to his girlfriend. The fact that I was in a a relationship with an older respected male and we were not having sex begged the question, what was he getting out of it then? Well, the likely conclusion was that what he was getting out of it was me. He was close to me, and being close to me actually had more merit than just the idea of having sex with me. So they realized, perhaps even more, that there may be more to me than only what they could see. In this way, I humanized myself and was able to maintain good friendships with male friends. My oasis with Destin was a dream. I was in and out of school, writing poetry in stacks of notebooks in classes during the day. Then, for a few hours in the afternoon, I was with Destin before returning home for the night to become lost in my dreamland of music and singing. There were fewer arguments at home because I was happier, and I seemed to be doing what was required of me. My parents didn't know about him, and there was no reason I could imagine telling them. And then the inexplicable happened. He told me that he was leaving to go back to the States in January, and on my birthday, no less. No, yes, no, yes. Scheiße! He explained that he and his parents had been considering it for quite a while, but he waited to tell me until it was the official plan. Apparently, I was instrumental in helping him get his head together, and now he was leaving to go live a real life in the States without me. Okay, that was the future, and now was the present. We agreed that we each had to make the best of what we had right now, without allowing the shadow of the future to undermine the sunshine that we both had today. We never would have said it that way, however. Our philosophical and emotional meanderings flowed as much as lying in a dark room in the silence and listening to Kate Bush's flawless soprano voice float in the air over her tender piano magic. We pondered life, death, other dimensions, worlds, and beings as we explored our own mythos. He felt that he was the son of one of these great beings in his own hierarchy of angels, demons, and everything in between. He was one of the good guys. He carried within him a flame, as did I, and we were fortunate to find each other in all of the chaos of this world, so that we could lose each other in languid streams of communion in the golden starlit river of luminosity. As the time for his departure approached, I felt myself becoming more and more discontent and irritable with my life. I looked out over this future of separation and found that there was a large gray question mark hanging in air for my birthday and beyond. On one of my more variant emotional mornings, when I was feeling particularly annoyed by the lot of it all, I did something irreversible. I was using a curling iron on my long, dark mane, and my bangs were acting as though they had a mind of their own that wasn't in accordance with mine. At some point, in a moment of extreme frustration, I pulled out the scissors to correct the problem. Well, it didn't. That was to be my moment of doom, as I clipped my bangs too short for the rest of my long tresses. I then sat back, steeped in the horror of what I had just done, because there was no going back to undo it. I suffered a hair disaster of the highest degree. If there was anything at all that I felt that my mother could understand, it was a hair emergency, so I called her and explained what had happened. She rallied to the rescue, and I was given permission to forego school in order to go to her stylist at the post exchange. He was a lovely young man from Turkey who had trimmed my hair once before. He did not speak much English other than good or bad, so trying to describe what you wanted was a pointless endeavor. You had to bring a picture to show him. I didn't have a picture of what I wanted, so I arrived and sat down in his chair feeling defeated. He took one look at what I did, picking up the aberrant short hair that I had mutilated and made that sound while waving his finger back and forth in the air. My faith in him to perform a hair miracle diminished quickly during that time. He began speaking in Turkish, pulling the hair here and there and acting like I had given him the worst hair puzzle in the history of the world to try and fix. Dear God, just please fix my hair, I prayed. Well, he did. He cut it all off. and permed it to give me a short pixie cut that defied any and all expectations that I had for a more subtle change. On the bright side, all the slightly green-tinged dark processed hair was now gone. On the very dark side, I had what I dreaded most at that time in my life. A short, wavy pixie cut that I absolutely hated. I knew that I had to go see my boyfriend, who I was sure would break up with me on sight. I reached into my core and summed up the courage necessary to go to Dustin's room. I prayed that I would not run into anyone that I knew, because I felt I would be mortified. When I reached Dustin's room, not a far walk from the PX, not only did I find him there, but Joshua and Gavin were hanging out as well. I took a deep breath, walked in, and the room was silent. All eyes were on me and my hair. Hey, I accidentally messed up my hair and I had to get it cut. It's short. It's really short. I stood there stating the obvious and feeling absolutely deflated as Destin replied, "I see that." I wanted to crawl under a rock, but there were none available. Destin sat down on the bed and motioned for me to sit on his lap. I complied. I felt like I was 6 years old as I hesitantly again built up my courage and asked the dreaded question, "So, do you like it?" You could hear a pin drop. The silence was deafening. As I sat there on his lap, he carefully placed his arm around me and said, "I like what's under it." This was a pivotal moment of acceptance for me because I felt that his attraction to me was perhaps based in a large part on my appearance, even though we connected in so many other ways. Now my appearance had dramatically shifted, and he reassured me without a shadow of a doubt that it changed nothing. He still liked me and cared for me the same, even if he didn't like my hairstyle. Joshua and Gavin dived in with their agreement. Like so many women and girls, I felt a nearly compulsive need to try to achieve a ridiculous level of impossible perfection every time that I walked out the door. There I was, surrounded by males that I perceived to like me, in part based solely on my appearance, and they floored me. I breathed a sigh of relief that I was sure could be felt on the moon. He reassured me. "It's fine." "Really?" I asked, almost in a whisper. "Really," he replied. "What do you think of it?" I queried. "It's different," he said to his credit. I somehow felt that I had to have flawless hair and makeup every time that I was there, partially because he had the goddess, Kate Bush, hanging on his wall, and who could possibly live up to that? I did my best with what I had. At that point, I leaned in to look at the photo of Kate from Lionheart, with her hair wild and crimped, and said, "I'm going to look like her one day. My hair is going to be just like that." Every boy in the room said, "No, no, no, you don't understand," with fervent disagreement. Joshua took a breath and said with his deep, resonating voice, "You look like you, and that's perfect. You're you. Just be you. You don't need to be anyone else." The rest of them nodded in agreement. The thought of just being me, and just having to live up to being me, while only needing to look like me, was the most empowering thought that I had ever been given by anyone other than my mother. When she complimented me on my appearance or told me that I was beautiful, I honestly thought that she was partial or biased because I was her daughter. These boys, my friends, saw me all the time in countless situations and knew me well enough to know how I felt at that moment. They chose to lift me up, and I felt accepted for who I was. This was a sweetness that I savored deeply with such rich, delicious delightfulness, and it changed me. I realized that some people's loyalties were not just blowing in the wind, only to change with the weather. At some point later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door that resulted in an introduction to Gavin's brother, Dan. He was almost the opposite of Dustin in appearance, in that he was exceedingly tall with long dark hair and a strong nose. His eyes were a deep brown in shadow under imposing brows. He was neither friendly nor not. Dan and I acknowledged each other in a typical social way and spent an hour or so together with the group at Dustin's. I remember how Gavin's descriptions of his older brother were cast with a foreboding element as though he was afraid of him. I found Dan to be okay and didn't feel intimidated by him in the least, but he wasn't my brother. After our meeting, I didn't think much of it. I had other things to consume my mind and break my heart. As the days passed and people responded well to my hair, I felt baffled by this show of support for a remarkably tragic cut. I just kept going, styling in the most creative ways, knowing it would grow out, because no scissor would graze it for an extended period of time. As the time I had with Destin continued to be pared down by each passing day, there was a feeling of pressure weighing on my heart. The Frankfurt weather cooperated in kind and was especially gloomy and overcast over those last days that we had together. I liked him and cared for him. Maybe I even loved him. But where does love go when the one you love goes? Our last night together came too quickly. We were lying in the dark with Kate playing in the background and making out pretty intensely. The angst was palpable, hanging in the air, colored by kisses, both tender and fierce, ending with the inevitable frustration that followed. He had been lying over me, kissing me, and then suddenly he just peeled back and slammed himself on the bed, looking skyward in the dark. "What would happen if we just did?" he asked. My heart felt small and alone, already anticipating his departure. If we did that, then you would leave, and I would be alone, and I couldn't deal with that. We talked about the opportunity that we were missing by not making love. I knew that it would take my feelings for him deeper, and that I wouldn't survive it well. So I had to say, "It's just not right. You're leaving. I may never see you again." He agreed, but he was torn. I knew he wanted to, and I doubted that his feelings would overpower him in the same way that I felt my own would overpower me. So I found myself with the same deep internal conflict that I had when I left New Orleans. The night before my flight out, Jensen Alex had come to my window at 1 a.m. It was planned. I was smitten with him. His eyes were the bluest blue, and his blonde hair was always perfectly messy, a bit like Rod Stewart's in that way. Jensen Alex had broken up with his girlfriend of 2 years just to make it clear to me that he was ready and available, regardless of the 2-year age difference between us. That night, we sat in the steamy Louisiana heat with kisses sweet. He wanted me to go off somewhere with him in his red truck. I knew I shouldn't. He persisted, and I resisted. He said that we wouldn't have to do that because there were other things that we could do. No, it was the same dilemma. I was leaving the next day to go and live in a foreign country. I wouldn't risk my heart for something so fleeting. The difference between Destin and Jensen Alex was that Jensen was angry with me for my choice. I didn't realize that he was going to feel so rejected. What he didn't understand was that I wasn't rejecting him at all. In fact, my decision was based on how strongly I felt about him, and I knew I couldn't risk it. So I didn't. Destin, in contrast, was feeling frustrated, but he didn't let it interfere with the feelings between us. When I left that night, I didn't think that I would ever see Destin again. I felt sadness in my soul because I would have to let go. We didn't fool ourselves into thinking that we would stay in touch. We both understood that his life would go on stateside without me and mine in Frankfurt without him. There was a heavy acceptance of this. We made no promises to break to each other. We were saying goodbye. The last embrace at the door felt absolutely terrible. And then I was gone, walking down the 4 flights of stairs, off to catch the U2 and journey home. On my birthday, there was a snowstorm, but in Frankfurt, you went to school in all kinds of weather. So it was that I found myself in the warm halls of FAHS, closing my locker and getting ready to go to class. Upon closing my locker, I looked up and saw Joshua approaching. And to my complete surprise, Destin was behind him. This was a deeply deliberate, thoughtful act on Joshua's part. He had acted as a guide for Destin, who specifically came to the high school, a place that he detested from his own past. As stunned as I was feeling, I also felt a sweet, syrupy thickness in my heart. They did this for me. I spoke solemnly. "Hey, what are you doing here? I thought that you were leaving today." Destin replied with complete and honest abandon. "I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye and wishing you a happy birthday." In the warmth of my surprise, I said, "But it's snowing. You walked all the way here in the snow?" He seemed somewhat amused by this. "You didn't think a little thing like a snowstorm was going to stop me, did you? Well, I suppose not, I thought, with a secret smile. I wore my gratitude in the expression on my face. He wished me a happy birthday, and I thanked him with my heart in my throat. I felt slightly anxious because our relationship had been kept on the down low, down low. And here he was at school, in public, surrounded by people, and willing to be seen with me. We shared an embrace as Joshua looked on with real concern for us. Destin said, "Let's walk." We headed for the side door of the building and stood there, looking out, as the snow continued building a blanket of delicate design all around. He told me that he would always care for me, and that he would miss me. Yes, I looked in his eyes. I could see that truth there, that complexity of feeling. We held each other, standing next to the exit door, and he said, "I have to go now." "I know," I said, as he gave me a quiet, snow-inspired, soft kiss. "You should go to class," he said, like a mock authority with an ironic smile. "In a minute," I said, reluctant to pull our foreheads apart. And he turned to leave, still holding my hand as we let go to only fingertips touching, while his stride took him further away. I stood in a kind of trance, seeing the flakes fall from heaven like fractal tears under the orange glow of the outside lights as he and Joshua exited the building. I watched them make their way through the snow that had reached the ground, leaving footprints that would soon be covered by tiny white crystals. My heart felt hollow and sad, like a piece of it was walking away. I stood there and watched as they reached the road, and then managed to pull myself away from the door. I wished there were somewhere else that I could go, but in the middle of a snowstorm, the only real option was to head to class. I knew that he wasn't the one for me, but he was the one for me at that time, and I was better having known him than not, though that thought, whispered in my heart, offered little comfort. Upon my arrival to German class, on time no less, I found myself sitting next to a new student. She was serenely beautiful, with dark bobbed hair and deep brown eyes framed by long black lashes. Very cosmopolitan, she smiled politely at me when our eyes met. She was dressed in a high-fashion, conservative European style that would have been appropriate for a runway. There was something lovely about her. So I smiled back and initiated conversation. I introduced myself to her and asked for her name, followed by where she was from. "My name is Afsara, and I am from Iran. My parents work for the United States government, and we just moved here from Hanau." Her accent was sweet, and her grasp of English nearly impeccable. In an effort to make her feel welcome, I asked her how she liked it so far, and engaged in more deliberate conversation, designed to let her know that I accepted her for who she was. I leaned in when talking to her, under the compassionately observant eye of the German teacher, Mr. Huber, and spoke the word, "Welcome." Her body seemed to relax a bit as she asked how I was today. Herr Huber watched the interaction, smiling to himself, and then looked down to his attendance book, ticking us off as present. "I just said goodbye to a very good friend, and I am feeling really sad," I said, flashing back to a few minutes earlier and wanting to go and follow in the snow. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said reflectively. "That is always so difficult to say goodbye." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." I learned that her parents were extremely strict and that she missed her home and family in Iran. She was not allowed to do much of anything other than to attend school. I knew that she must have dealt with her share of prejudice, despite being in a multicultural environment like Frankfurt. There were a lot of people that were understandably severely upset because some State Department workers were killed and hostages had been taken at the U.S. Embassy in Iran. I had little tolerance for some people's proclivity for hatred towards all Iranians, instead of limiting their feelings of hostility to the few Iranians that had perpetrated the crime. For me, she was a welcome distraction to a heart-rending morning, someone new and exotic to see every time I came to class, which was not always. She had kind eyes and a good heart. I could feel it under her very proper exterior, which didn't bother me at all. I wasn't sure how I came across to her, but she was accepting of me, and we would always say hi to each other. She was a beautiful classmate. If the circumstances had been different, we may have been able to be friends after school, but with her strict parents, that was not a possibility.